on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes & Co. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dubes & Co.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
There's a guy who went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Good morning, I'm Dawn Neeson and I'm standing in for the lovely Bev Turner today on GB News. Well, it's a new year, but the same strikes are back again, aren't they? Walkouts are taking place due to a row over pay and conditions. Disruption is set to take place between today and Saturday. I've got a great story about my journey as well. And I'll be joined by my brilliant panel, author Joanna Williams and Peter Whittle from the New Culture Forum. And we're going to get stuck into, oh yes, Prince Harry as well this morning. Him again. He wants to get his brother back. Not thinking he's going about it the right way. How about you? That's all coming up after we have a quick look at the latest news.
Dawn, thank you. Good morning. It's 1 minute past 10. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. Train passengers are being warned of significant disruption this week as over 40,000 rail workers stage fresh strikes. Members of the RMT union at Network Rail and 14 train operators will walk out for 48 hours from today and then again on Friday, whilst drivers in the ASLEF union will strike on Thursday. It's part of the long-running dispute over pay, jobs and conditions, which RMT General Secretary Mick Lynch told us is vital for the future of the industry.
It's up to the government now to show us that they mean business and that they want to facilitate some talks, rather than undermining them as we believe they did before Christmas by putting provisions in that they know none of the railway unions can accept. So if we can get some realistic talks with some proper proposals and progressive talks, we'll work with all the parties to get that on.
Well, Transport Secretary Mark Harper says it's time for the unions to get off the picket line and round the negotiating table.
Government's going to continue to work really hard to try and help bring the two sides together to get this resolved. I know how frustrating this is for commuters, and the danger is it puts people off using the railways, which is a bit of self-harm on the part of the rail unions that haven't settled this dispute. What I think the government can do is make sure there's a fair and reasonable offer on the table, which there is, facilitate those negotiations between employers and trade unions, and try and make sure we get this dispute resolved for the travelling public.
Health bosses are calling on the government to respond to mounting pressure within the NHS, with top medics describing the current situation as unbearable. More than a dozen NHS trusts and ambulance services declared critical incidents over the festive period. The Royal College of Emergency Medicine says somewhere between 300 to 500 people are dying each week as a result of delays in urgent care. Labour and the Liberal Democrats are putting pressure on ministers to address concerns about the state of critical care. The government says it's giving the NHS and social care sector an additional £14 billion over the next 2 years. Meanwhile, NHS data shows the number of children needing help for serious mental health problems rose by 39% last year. The NHS says it received more than 1 million referrals in England for those under the age of 18. They involve children who are suicidal, self-harming and suffering serious depression or anxiety. The Royal College of Psychiatrists says increasing social inequality, austerity and online harm has played a role. Low-income households will receive £900 cash support this spring to help with the cost of living crisis. The government says the money will go directly to bank accounts in 3 separate payments. But campaigners argue support for the most vulnerable has not increased on what was announced last year, despite rising costs. 8 million people will be eligible, including those on universal credit, pension credit and tax credits. 2 British citizens are among 4 people killed in a mid-air crash between 2 helicopters in Australia yesterday. Diane and Ron Hughes, aged 57 and 65, were on holiday in the country when the accident happened in Australia's Gold Coast region. 3 others were left critically injured. Queensland police say the initial investigations indicate the collision occurred when one helicopter was taking off and the other was landing. Brazilian footballing legend Pelé is due to be buried today. Thousands of fans had gathered to pay respects to his coffin, placed at the grounds of his former club Santos. Pelé lost his battle with cancer last Thursday. The 3-time World Cup winner was 82. An NFL player is in a critical condition after suffering a cardiac arrest during a match in Cincinnati. The Buffalo Bills club has confirmed Damar Hamlin collapsed on the field after a tackle in the first quarter against the Cincinnati Bengals. The 24-year-old is currently sedated in hospital but remains in a critical condition. The game was postponed following the incident. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens, of course. Now, though, it's back to Dawn Neeson.
Good morning, I'm Dawn Neeson. I'm standing in for the love Bev Turner today on GB News. New year, new us, not so new strike situation. But here's what's coming up this hour. Today we're talking, rail strikes. I'm sorry, the advent calendar from hell continues as the worst week of rail disruption in 30 years begins and commuters hit with 5 days of the most disruptive strikes yet. Elsewhere, Liberal Democrats have called for Parliament to be recalled over the mounting winter pressure on the NHS, urging that the government pass an emergency health plan and declare a national major incident. And, it wouldn't be the new year without Prince Harry, would it? He says he wants his father and brother back in an IT interview set to be televised days before his memoir, Spare, is released next week. In a separate interview with CBS News, the Duke of Sussex criticised Buckingham Palace, yes again, over an alleged failure to defend him and his wife Meghan Markle. We'll bring you all the full details on that one. And of course, this show is nothing without you and your views. So please email us on gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews to have your say. Right, 40,000 members, Happy New Year by the way, 40,000 members of the RMT union have begun their first two-day walkout of the week today. Yay, how lovely. Network Rail said the strikes would result in about 20% of services running. This comes as commuters return to the office, sparking fears people will give up on train travel for good. Earlier, GB News spoke to the Transport Secretary, Mark Harper, who maintained that the government is working hard to resolve the dispute and urged RMT leader Mick Lynch to negotiate.
Was put to rail unions. Two of the unions accepted that deal on Network Rail. The RMT, about a third of their members did vote for it, even though they were instructed not to. But they're still not willing to settle what is a very fair and reasonable offer. So look, government's going to continue to work really hard to try and help bring the two sides together to get this resolved. I think my New Year message to Mick Lynch would be make a New Year's resolution, get off the picket line, round the negotiating table, and let's get these damaging strikes to an end. There's a fair and reasonable payoff on the table for the people you represent, Mick. So let's get round the table and let's see if we can get the dispute sorted out.
Right, OK, well, let's get more reactions from our national reporter, Paul Hawkins, who's at Euston Station for us this morning. Good morning, Paul. How are you?
Yeah, morning, Dawn. I'll be honest, it's cold, it's wet and it's windy, but the picket line is still here at the moment. It may be a new year, but it's frankly the same old strikes. And just listening to that clip of the Transport Secretary, Mark Harper there, he was talking about wages, but he didn't mention the conditions that the government have attached to that deal, which is why the RMT really isn't budging. And I'm speaking to Mick Lynch earlier, the General Secretary of the RMT, and he was saying that the red lines that they're really not budging on are things that the government threw in at the last minute when they met with the unions before Christmas, which are things such as driver-only trains and getting rid of the guard. Throwing things like that in at the last minute kind of took the unions by surprise, and they say that those are red lines that they simply will not move on. So it's not just about pay, according to the unions. They're saying it's also about working practices, and this is what Mick Lynch, the boss of the RMT, told me earlier.
Well, we want a resolution. We're ready and able to discuss with the companies and the government whenever they want to put that on. We're hearing that the Transport Secretary is saying that he's keen to convene talks. And if there's an invite, we'll be there today, tomorrow, or whenever it is that they want to get there. But there has to be a change. Well, they've put provisions and conditions into the documentation with the train operating companies that they know none of the railway unions can accept. They want it to bring back driver-only operation. They want to get rid of guards right across the railway fleet and across every railway service. They want us to accept that as a principle. They know we can never do that. It wasn't in the documentation and the discussions before Christmas, and they chose one weekend when we thought we were working up towards a deal to put that in. So that undermined the talks and stopped them in their tracks.
Paul, what is the general mood amongst the passengers who are trying to travel there at Euston today?
Well, people are frustrated. To be honest, there aren't many passengers around, if I'm being truthful. A lot of the stations around, the mainline stations around London, of course on the Tube it's different, the Tube is running today, but on the mainline stations they're mostly empty, and people have kind of, we knew that when this industrial action started that society had changed somewhat because of the effect of COVID, so there was more working from home. But now people have adapted even more, and so people kind of say, oh yeah, new year, oh right, there's another rail strike in. Okay, well, I'll just have to make the same plans that I did before. The problem is that the longer this dispute goes on, the more those plans become permanent and the more passengers permanently stay away from the railways. And that's really bad for the country, generally speaking, because you need your railways, you need your trains to be running, but it's bad for the unions, it's bad for the rail operators. Remember, the rail industry was decimated by the pandemic and the taxpayer had to step in and bail them out, and it was starting to recover after that. So the longer this industrial action continues, then the worse it is for everyone.
It doesn't look a particularly big picket line behind you there this morning, Paul. What is the mood amongst the strikers that are there? I mean, as you pointed out, you know, in theory they could be striking their way out of jobs because less people use the railway lines, they won't have jobs to go back to. So have you spoken to them? What sort of vibe are you getting from them?
Resolute, I would say, very resolute. Right. They're determined to carry on, even though they've lost almost 3 weeks of wages since this dispute began. 20 days of strike action we've had. That's 20 days lost wages for them. It's 20 days that have cost the economy, that have cost taxpayers, that have cost the rail industry as well. But they're very resolute at the moment. Speaking to Mick Lynch earlier, I said, how long is this going to continue? I mean, you've still got months and months left of your mandate to strike. Are you going to carry on into the summer? Or are we going to see strike action during the coronation? He said, look, we're not thinking about public events like the coronation. We're just thinking about getting the best deal for our members, which is the job of the unions. You can understand that. But at the moment, they're going to carry on for as long as their mandate takes them. And if that's into the summer, then so be it.
Gosh, not great news there. Paul, thank you so much joining us from Euston Station this morning, covering the rail strikes there with the picket line in the background. Now, welcome Olivia Hutley joining me as our news political reporter. Olivia, can you just say in simple terms, what is going on today? Who is striking? What unions are involved? And what effect is it having on the network?
Gosh.
Just briefly.
So we've got the RMT striking today and tomorrow, also on Friday and Saturday. Then you've got ASLEF, who are the train drivers, striking on Thursday, which essentially means a week of utter chaos. It's being billed as the most difficult week for the railways in the last 30 years. Politically, Rishi Sunak is hoping to find a way forward through legislation eventually, which would essentially curtail the rights of strikers. But backbenchers are getting a little bit tetchy because there hasn't yet been a timetable put forward for when we can expect to see that legislation being passed. And we're now hearing reports that the courts and the Lords, as you might expect, would block such legislation. So that was... We were talking late last year about how in the long term that was the solution, but that looks as though it's coming off the table. So the government and the unions are going to have to reach some kind of compromise before that. What's being billed in The Sun this morning is that perhaps the government is going to push for giving bonuses, holidays, better pensions for train staff in lieu of pay, essentially, in lieu of the sort of pay rises that they're asking for, which might be some sort of compromise. But then you've still got the sticking point of the safety issue. Government wants to transition to driver-only trains, as we keep hearing, on lots of services. And the unions are holding out against that because obviously it would mean fewer staff, fewer members of the union. Without that issue being resolved, it's hard to see how we can get through this. And so I think we can expect to see more weeks like this in the months ahead.
It's fairly depressing news, isn't it? And I think what a lot of people listening and watching today are confused about, it's like, you know, the government saying, and the government and the companies are saying, yeah, we are talking to the unions, but Mick Lynch is saying they are not talking to us. I mean, how do we know, are they talking to one another about these things?
Well, Mark Harper seems to have a better relationship with Mick Lynch than Grant Shapps, his predecessor, so that's a good starting point. The issue is that, yes, they're having conversations. There are conversations in the offing, at least, about these issues around holidays, pensions, bonuses, etc. But we just keep hitting this sticking point of the driver-only trains. And however many conversations they have, they're not going to get to the sort of substance of the conversation, which is this issue, because if the government concedes the union's point that it's dangerous to have driver-only trains, then it'll be impossible for the government to reform the rail network further down the line. And we know that since the pandemic, the government has been propping up the rail network, and we know that
the government being the taxpayers,
the government being the taxpayers. Exactly. So the government needs to find some sort of cost-saving reform for the future of the railways. And while the unions are pushing back against that, any conversation is pretty much meaningless.
It was Tim Shoveler, who is a chief negotiator for Network Rail this morning, was saying that the RMT aren't giving their members enough time to digest what has actually been offered. I mean, they literally, Mick Lynch said, no, we're still going out on strike, without actually asking. And Mr Shubble was saying this morning that if the members had had more time to digest what was on the table, then they probably wouldn't vote to go on strike any further. Do you get the impression there are feelings along those lines for the strikers?
Well, yes, I think that although we see the interview after interview with strikers on the picket line who are, as Paul says, very resolute, there are other workers who are getting a bit restless with this strike action. Of course, they're losing huge amounts of pay. We had someone earlier saying that in the last 200 days, there have been people who've been on strike for 20 of those days, 1 in 10 days on strike. That's an awful lot of lost pay. And we saw that last time the government put forward a pay offer, actually, it was rejected by the RMT, but a surprising proportion of workers actually voted in favour of that deal.
And that was 9%, wasn't it?
And that was 9%. So we are seeing a little bit of wiggle room from strikers, but with someone like Mick Lynch in charge of the RMT, yeah, he's going to keep playing these tactics of pushing that offer forward straight away and not giving people time to digest.
I thought it's very interesting, the quote from Mick Lynch this morning said there'd been unprecedented ministerial interference, which makes you think he's playing more of a political game than actually concentrating on what his members want.
Yes, and we saw over Christmas, we had on GB News, we had some former head of the unions talking about they would like to see a general strike taking place. So we've got the unions at the moment, all of these various unions of different public services, claiming that they're not working together to cause maximum chaos for the country for political reasons. But more and more, we're seeing evidence that perhaps they are, and that what they would like to see is a general strike and a sort of overhaul of the political system, as it were, rather than union leaders, acting just in the best interest of their workers.
None of it's good news, is it, Olivia? Thank you very much for that this morning. And yes, we have to move on now. After the break, I'll be joined by my wonderful panel this morning, and that's author Joanna Williams and director of the new Culture Forum, Peter Whittle. And we'll get stuck into some of the biggest stories of the day. So we'll see you back in a very short moment.
Looking ahead to today's weather, and the UK's looking wet and windy for many, with bands of rain moving across the country. Let's take a look at the details. So starting across the southwest of England, we have some heavy rain, particularly over the hills and moors, and this will move eastwards accompanied with gusty winds, and that will be particularly near the coasts. It's also cloudy across the southeast with outbreaks of patchy rain with some heavier bursts. Temperatures above average, highs of 12 Celsius. Cloudy across Wales with outbreaks of rain, locally heavy, particularly in the west and across high ground, and some eastern areas will remain dry into the afternoon. After this morning's rain's cleared, it will be drier for a time across the Midlands before the next band of rain arrives from the west during the afternoon, highs of 12 Celsius here as well. Any early morning rain will clear eastwards, but it will remain cloudy before a new band of rain already across western areas edges in for the afternoon, winds strengthening into the afternoon. The best of any sunshine will be reserved for the far northwest of Scotland. Further south, cloud and rain will move eastwards with some heavier bursts over the high ground. Meanwhile, across Northern Ireland, low cloud and outbreaks of rain will slowly clear into the afternoon. Winds will strengthen from late afternoon, becoming gusty, particularly near coasts with gales later. So, remaining unsettled, with cloud and rain pushing through, the rain will become heavy and persistent over western hills as winds strengthen. And that is how your weather is shaping up this Tuesday.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 10:22, a brave, bright new year, kind of. I'm Dawn Neeson, I'm filling in for Bev Turner today, and you're watching GB News. Now, let me introduce you to my panel this morning. I'm pleased, actually thrilled to be joined, because they've got here, come and talk to me about some really depressing stories, by the author and academic Joanna Williams and the director of the New Culture Forum, Peter Whittle. Welcome, both of you. Now, we've had a quick flick through the papers this morning.
Yeah.
2 stories dominate, so we're going to go straight in on the first one, though, and this is the rail strikes. We've been talking about it all morning already. Peter, I think you've selected this story too.
I think it's...
Actually, we've got an opinion on this one, haven't we? So anyone. So
the angle that the Times is taking on this story is that millions of us are expected to shun trains forever as a result of another week of chaos. It's like New Year, just like the old year. We carry on with the strikes, we carry on with the problems in the NHS, we even carry on with Harry and Meghan, exactly where we left off back in December.
There is a theme, isn't there? It's like, you know, half the country's on strike, the only person that isn't is Harry, and he's talking about his miserable life.
Exactly. But I think, you know, there is something to be said for this idea that people are just going to shun trains, but I don't think it's simply down to strikes. I think there's clearly a huge surge in the numbers of people still working from home, obviously not us three on the panel
Many
this morning.
civil servants, I think, is another story today.
So I would normally get the train to come to the studio here, had to get a car this morning, and it was interesting talking to the taxi driver who said that there were no more cars on the road than he would expect on a normal Tuesday.
Interesting.
And this is through central London at rush hour. And according to my taxi driver, who's obviously experienced to these things, it's just people are just giving up altogether and either just having an extra week off on holiday or are just working from home, are simply not making the effort and not even fighting to get in.
There were lots of people on social media going, oh, train strike, which is really bad, isn't it? But I've got another week sitting at home in the PJs.
Exactly. Which is nice for the individuals, but we have to ask, what's the effect of that on the economy?
Well, this is the problem, isn't it? The hospitality industry in particular, and sort of high streets. I mean, sort of like, you know, city centres, station shops.
It was the same with me this morning coming through London. No, but I was coming from the other side, from west. No traffic jams. You know, I'm old enough to remember the 1970s and the strikes then. And the roads used to be crammed with people who were, by hook or by crook, going to get into work.
Yeah.
And I think that is gone. I think that the problem is that the effect, therefore, of strikes like this are going to diminish and diminish and diminish. And it's the same old thing. You know, they might be accelerating a kind of trend that was already there of not going on, say, like public transport. I think since the pandemic, it's never quite recovered, actually.
No.
You know.
And this is the problem. I mean, it's less people are using them because of the pandemic, the way working life has changed. Less people will use them because of the strikes. You're going to end up striking your way out of a job. My journey this morning was on the tube coming through London, and that was hell on wheels. very slow wheels. It has to be. And it's like you're not even on strike, so it's affecting everything else that's happening certainly in the city. Peter, let's move on to your story.
Yes.
You're going to mention the B word. I hate you already.
Brexit.
Yeah, that one. Oh.
No, this is a story, kind of, this is what I would call a Westminster story entirely, but it's about, it's a Labour figure, Lisa Nandy, you know, senior Labour figure, has dismissed the idea, which apparently there was an idea, that of rejoining the EU. She's dismissed it as a fantasy. I mean, I remember people like Sadiq Khan have put this forward, you know, that we should try to rejoin the single market. This is just utterly absurd, but not just absurd, not just is it a fantasy, it would be a very dangerous fantasy, you know, because one of the worst things about this past 5 years for me has been the way in which a vote has been utterly dismissed by quite a large proportion of our governing class, you know, and I'm astonished. I was astonished that this thing could happen in Britain, actually. So they're trying basically to reassure Labour voters who are put off because they voted for leave. It was about 30%, I believe.
And there was quite a few, that red wall.
There were, absolutely. I mean, this story makes me so cross, though, I'm afraid, for a number of reasons.
Everyone's cross this morning.
Well, I mean, part of me just thinks about time. I mean, seriously, we voted for Brexit back in 2016. We're talking 7 years almost. It's taken them 7 years to come out and say that they won't reverse it. Are we supposed to be pleased about this? But it makes me cross for another reason, because I don't actually believe them. I think there's some weaselly words going on here. And I think they're not, when they say they're not going to reverse Brexit, they're still talking about renegotiating that relationship with the EU. And I think they're going to weasel around it and join things like, you know, the common market or whatever it is that they're going to look to actually reverse a lot of the gains or potential gains of Brexit.
Yes. I mean, I think Lisa's echoing what her boss said a couple of weeks ago, wasn't it, before Christmas? It's like, you know, we're actually going to stick by that democratic vote.
Yes, I think you're
right. Basically.
I think they will try to align us, realign us as closely as possible. So it might be Brexit, you know, just almost officially. But I mean, frankly, if they were to do that, I think you can then start to seriously put a question mark over democracy in this country.
No,
this
absolutely.
is the thing, isn't it? And we've also read today in, I think many of the papers have covered it, that there's going to be, you know, this bonfire of EU regulations we were all promised. It's not actually happening now because I haven't got the time or the staff to do it, really. So it's, but we're still talking about the B word, as you say. Right, we are going to leave the important H story. That's Harry, in case you're interested. And all the newspapers are until after the break. So, and after that, indeed, that break, the NHS is being described as on a knife edge with some A&Es in complete state of crisis. The government says it has offered more resources to the NHS and social care to help services cope. We'll get stuck into that after your morning news.
Good morning, it's 10:29. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. Train passengers are being warned of significant disruption this week as over 40,000 rail workers stage fresh strikes. Members of the RMT union at Network Rail and 14 train operators will walk out for 48 hours from today and again on Friday, while drivers in the ASLEF union will strike on Thursday. This latest strike action is part of the long-running dispute over pay, job and conditions, which RMT General Secretary Mick Lynch told us is vital for the future of the industry.
It's up to the government now to show us that they mean business and that they want to facilitate some talks, rather than undermining them, as we believe they did before Christmas, by putting provisions in that they know none of the railway unions can accept. So if we can get some realistic talks with some proper proposals and progressive talks, we'll work with all the parties to get that on.
But Transport Secretary Mark Harper says it's time for the unions to get off the picket line and round the negotiating table.
Government's going to continue to work really hard to try and help bring the two sides together to get this resolved. I know how frustrating this is for commuters, and the danger is it puts people off using the railways, which is a bit of self-harm on the part of the rail unions that haven't settled this dispute. what I think the government can do is make sure there's a fair and reasonable offer on the table, which there is, facilitate those negotiations between employers and trade unions, and try and make sure we get this dispute resolved for the travelling public.
Health bosses are warning the government needs to respond to mounting pressure within the NHS, with top medics describing the current situation as unbearable. More than a dozen NHS trusts and ambulance services declared critical incidents over the festive period. The Royal College of Emergency Medicine says somewhere between 300 to 500 people are dying each week as a result of delays in urgent care. The government says it's given the NHS and social care sector an additional £14 billion over the next 2 years. 2 British citizens were among 4 people killed in a mid-air crash between 2 helicopters in Australia yesterday. Diane and Ron Hughes, aged 57 and 65, were on holiday in the country when the accident happened in Australia's Gold Coast region. 3 others were left critically injured. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel. Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Hello, it's 10:34. This is Bev Turner Today. I'm not Bev Turner, the sharp-eyed might have noticed. I'm Dawn Neeson, and you're watching and listening to GB News. Now, the Duke of Sussex has said he wants to reconcile with the King and the Prince of Wales, but has claimed that the palace is unwilling to. Wonder why? Prince Harry has revealed his side of the story in a set of interviews which are set to air 2 days ahead of the publication of his highly anticipated, already half-priced, memoir, Spare. Here's a little taste of what we can expect.
It needed to be this way. The leaking and the planting. I want a family, not an institution. They feel as though it's better to keep us somehow as the villains. They've shown absolutely no willingness to reconcile. I would like to get my father back. I would like to have my brother back.
Well, there you go. Right, joining us now, I'm delighted to say, is the author of Elizabeth and Philip, a story of young love, marriage and monarchy, Dr. Tessa Dunlop. Hello, Tessa. Lovely to see you. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Tessa, we have to talk about Harry, don't we? The front page of pretty much every newspaper today. Harry, I want my father and brother back. What do you make about what he's saying and the way he's going about, if that's what he wants, to get the family back together?
What we've got is a perfect storm where
The Duke of Sussex is clearly a man in pain. I think perhaps inevitably his two primary family members, remaining family members, were his brother and his father until he married Meghan Markle. And now he's lost both of them. So he's suffering. I think that's perhaps inevitable. And at the same time, he has left his royal role. He's left the institution of monarchy, but he, of course, with inbuilt entitlement, because he was born a blue-blooded prince, has certain expectations about the way he should live, and understandably, I think so, and therefore he needs to make money. So he's punching out this painful message, painful for him, painful for the royal family to receive, with maximum money-making capacity. So it is effectively a perfect storm, and it's a very uncomfortable one, I think, for both the House of Montecito and the House of Windsor.
And is it going to work, Tessa? I mean, come on, if you really want to get back on... All families have rows, OK? This one might be slightly more dramatic. But if you really want to get back on side with a family member, I mean, it's not only washing the dirty laundry in public, it's hanging it out to dry and pointing it out to you in graphic detail. I mean, if you were William, and Kate, I think, is coming in for a bit of a bashing as well in the book that's coming out, is this really the way to build bridges?
I think one of the primary issues, and he kind of addresses it in one of those trailers that have been released, is that he doesn't belong to a so-called normal family. It is an institution as well as a family, and Harry's left the institution and wants just the family, and ne'er the twain will meet, because of course the remaining family members are still within the institution. So there's a paradox there, and it's very difficult to see how it can be unpacked. Will it work? Well, one part of the perfect storm is working, and that is they're making a lot of money. They've got extraordinary platforms in a way that former royals who left the institution didn't have. They've got a whole new continent, not at their feet, but certainly more receptive than I think our conservative press would like to acknowledge in this country. And I think that amidst the pain thesis, because we have to recognise that it's their truth rather than just the whole truth, I think that he's made some valid criticisms. But do I believe this is the road to recovery for his relationship with Charles and William? No, it's clearly not. It doesn't take a psychotherapist to work that one out.
And Tessa, I have to ask this question, I mean, because that's what people watching, listening this morning will be saying. How much of this do you think is coming from Meghan? Or do you think it is all Harry's doing?
Well, interestingly, I think that we would love to pretend. I say we. I say the kind of the agendaed press, and it is Dawn. I mean, even the way you introduce this section, there were little arrows flying, weren't there? You know, already half price. But when the majority of Britain's press are not on Harry and Meghan's side. I'm not saying they should be, but I think that we have to own that. And generally, because Harry was a charismatic, cool dude who did his couple of tours in Afghanistan, he wasn't, you know, a dissolute king like Edward VIII. He wasn't a disgraceful prince like Andrew. He was someone we were all fond of. So it works for our predominantly right-wing media agenda to make out that the baddie is Meghan. Baddie insofar as we don't like people attacking our famous institution of state, the monarchy. But if you look at Harry, I mean, this is a guy who's on a very deeply personal journey, and he's clearly a man in pain. I was struck in those trailers how pale he looked. There is no sort of sun-drenched Californian vibe going on. He's a man who's feeling this. And without the protection of monarchy and without the protection of his family around him, I kind of feel that he's almost alone. It's something that Meghan can't share with him, really, because she very briefly flirted with the House of Windsor and kind of pretended to be a princess for a little bit. But Harry grew up with this. The split, the wrench. I mean, this is his roots. This is his DNA. It's really painful stuff, which is why it is both compelling and appalling to watch.
Yeah, it is incredibly sad. And, you know, speaking as part of the British media, Tessa, I do have issue that they are using the American media to have a go at the British media. I think it's called hypocrisy. Any case, thank you so much for joining.
Dawn, but no, I want to ask you quickly then, what should they do then? How do they make their money? How do they get their grievances across if they don't use the American plan?
He did get 10.8 million a few years ago, didn't he? And he's got an inheritance from the Queen dying. Any case, thank you very much, Tessa, for joining us this morning. She always has to have the last word. That's what Tessa does. Right, OK, now we have to move on. Medics are warning that the NHS is on a knife edge as critical incidents are declared in hospital trusts across the country. It follows a warning from the country's top A&E doctor that delays in the NHS could be the worst on record. Right, OK, well, let's go and talk to someone who's at one of these hospitals now. Our national reporter, Theo Chinkomba, joins us from West Hertfordshire Ambulance Station in Hemel Hempstead. Good morning, Theo. Looking very wet and miserable there. Tell us what's happening where you are at the moment.
Yes, it's yet another day where we've been hearing from health bosses about the situation in the NHS across the country, and we're here at the East of England Ambulance Service where twice in the last couple of weeks they have declared a business continuity incident. And what this means is that they want to ensure that they can focus their resources and make sure they meet the patients with the greatest needs so that they can get support to some of the wider support from their health and care partners. Now, separately, next week we are going to be seeing ambulance workers, not this trust, but 9 others across the UK who are represented by the GMB union, and they rejected a 4% pay rise from the government, and they say it simply doesn't meet with what's happening at the moment, particularly with the cost of living, and they're saying we want a better deal. So we could see them next week, Wednesday. We do know just a couple of weeks ago they did have their walkout postponed. Now, going forward, we've heard from the BMA, the British Medical Association. They're saying the government's political choices are leading patients to die unnecessarily, and the chair of the association was saying the current situation we're seeing in the NHS is intolerable and unsustainable, both for our patients and hard-working staff. Now, the government, in response, they're saying they've invested £14.1 billion and 500 million to free up hospital beds and help with hospital discharges. So it's challenging. We're hearing this morning from bosses saying this could last for months if anything isn't done about this.
Oh, not good news again. Theo, thank you so much for that update. Now, we're going to join join me now is NHS Doctor Dr. Bob Gill, and Director of the Great NHS Heist. Thank you for joining us this morning, Dr. Gill. How dire? I mean, the headlines in all the newspapers this morning are just utterly depressing. I mean, NHS chaos headlines we have been seeing for many years now, but it feels like it's got a new urgency. You know, the NHS is on a knife edge. I mean, how dire is the situation for the NHS at the moment?
Well, just to give you one statistic, in October of this year alone, there were over 40,000 people waiting for a hospital bed 12 hours after a decision to admit them had been made. Now, those are record figures. We know that for every 80 patients waiting under those circumstances, there will be 1 preventable death. So we are in new territory, and, you know, people like myself, campaigners, have been warning for years now that the NHS is being deliberately defunded, restructured, and the chaos we face now is of deliberate government creation. Let's not be in any illusions about what's going on here. We have the deliberate sabotaging, bringing the NHS to a point of collapse so the politicians can break our trust in the service, so they can move us to an insurance-based system.
So, I mean, what can the government do? I mean, we know they have spoken about long-term plans, but what can they do now? If we are talking about a knife edge with the collapse imminent, especially with the rise in flu and COVID admissions, what can they do right now to actually stop people, as you've just said? I mean, I think it was like 500, wasn't it? 500 unnecessary deaths because the NHS is not functioning well every week. So what can the government do right now to stop that happening?
Well, there are pay disputes across the NHS. We have the junior doctors voting for strike action in the next few days. We have nurses voting for strike action. We have ambulance men on strike. Now, you would have thought this would be an obvious thing to sort out before, to stem the hemorrhage of staff out of the NHS. So that's the first thing they could do. The next thing they could do is to allow healthcare workers who have been pushed out of the health and social care system because of their non-compliance with a COVID mandate to bring them back into the workforce. So we have a problem of discharging patients out of NHS hospitals into social care, so they could very instantly repair some of the damage that their policies have already done. Respect the restoration of wages that NHS staff are requiring to stem the exodus of NHS staff.
Is a lot of people who watch and listen to GB News would say that the system is broken, it's not fit for purpose anymore. Do you think the NHS does need a radical overhaul, not just more money slung at it?
Well, it has had multiple radical overhauls that have got us to this situation. We have had consecutive governments deliberately restructuring the NHS, pretending as if nothing has changed. But what has undergone behind the scenes is a massive structural change, which has fragmented the NHS, outsourced services, saddled it with massive debts, private finance initiative debts, and allowed the sucking away of money away from the delivery of care into profits for corporations, outsourcing corporations, debt servicing, and the cost of the failure of the outsourcing contract. So government, let me say this again, our politicians have deliberately sabotaged the NHS to bring it to this point of collapse so they can make the argument, as you've just done, oh, maybe we need to change and rethink the model. They have sabotaged it. They have vandalized the system. That's what we need to address. Why have our politicians destroyed the NHS?
Again, it's not good news, is it? Thank you so much for joining us this morning, and good luck with all the work you do, you and your colleagues. Right, I'm going to have a quick chat to the panel on this one now. And my panel this morning, I'm pleased to be joined by the author and academic Joanna Williams and the director of the New Culture Forum, Peter Whittle. Now, firstly, we have to jump back from the NHS to talk about Harry and Meghan. I can tell you're thrilled by this one. So, I mean, what do we make of what Tessa was saying at the front page headlines today? Harry wants his dad and his brother back.
I mean, the man's... Oh, go on, Peter, you can go first.
I was going to say, so with what Tessa was saying, I was cringing a bit, I have to say, listening to her, because she was saying, oh, he's suffering, he's in pain, you know, and all of this. I mean, for goodness sake, you know, he's an extremely privileged, wealthy young man who's made a decision, right? He now says, I want a family, not an institution. You are part of an institution. You were brought up to be part of an institution. If you don't like it, just simply renounce your titles. It's simple, right? Just go away. You know, it's happened before, the Duke of Windsor did, but take the initiative. Get rid of your own titles. You don't have to wait for the government to do anything about that, or the king. I'm sick to death of hearing about them, of course, like many of us are. I don't think it'll destroy the monarchy one bit. I think that, if anything, people will gradually have had enough of them by the time they finish.
I think there is, even in America, there might be a fatigue here, Joanna. And I think, on a human level, it is incredibly sad.
Do you know what? I'm struggling to find what's sad about it. I mean, I tend to agree with Peter. You've got somebody here who is incredibly privileged, but also strikes me incredibly stupid as well. And this is the first time I'm really saying this. I mean, you know, families have conflict. People argue. But anybody who's seeking to reconcile with a family member after an argument knows that you do not go about it by spreading your tales about your family members at the exact same time as you're saying, but please reconcile with me. I mean, it just makes no sense whatsoever. And the problem is, even if they are doing this for the money, even if they are doing this just purely to maintain that status, that platform in the US, people are bored, rigid of this by now. It's same old, same old. There's nothing new coming out. We know all of this. We've heard it all so many times before. And even where I did disagree with the guest who was on on previously, you know, when she says, oh, the American press are kind of on their side, even the Washington Post, the woke Washington Post, said that the Netflix series was a pity party. And I clapped. Yeah, absolutely right.
Can I just one more point, actually, to make about this, I think it's very important, is that during that whole Netflix thing, which I thought was a crashing bore, right, but never once did they bring up that the most incendiary claim of all in the Oprah interview when they said that that a member of the royal family had drawn attention to Archie's skin colour or something like that. And you thought, well, wait a minute, when are you going to deliver on this? Or was that just purely muckraking and lying?
Keeping them dangling. It might be in the book. We don't know. We don't know what's in that yet. I just think that, as you were saying about the turning so much privilege into the cult of victimhood, I feel for people who are watching us this morning who are, and you know, we keep saying, struggling to pay their bills. You know, they are really worried about how they're going to cope financially. And, you know, I love Tessa, working with Tessa, but, you know, they are incredibly privileged, Harry and Meghan. They've got money. They don't need to do this to get money.
And not only were they incredibly privileged, but where Tessa was right was that Harry was incredibly popular as well. Yes, we loved him, and we must remember as well that we also loved Meghan. When they got married, they were that was a television event. You know, the nation was joining in with this. We loved the couple, and they had goodwill on their side. So it's not the case that the media kind of turned against them just for the sake of it. You know, they did things that provoked that response.
Very much so. We are going to move on now. We're going to move on to robot wars.
Yes, apparently we're all doomed.
Oh, we know that. Yes, I've been told that several times.
This is some story actually, which I believe is in the Sun, and it's nearly half of tech boffins, scientists, I guess, believe humans will be destroyed by artificial intelligence. I mean, the gist of it is that they are going to become so clever that in fact they outwit us, and that there will be 10. In fact, apparently this is a real, this is going to happen. 10 billion, I think, robots within about 20 years, and there'll be 9 billion of us, right? So there'll be about, a huge number more of them than us. I mean, when I read this, the thing is, to me, it sort of doesn't strike me that they will outwit us as being the main threat to civilization. It's the fact that they're going to make almost everything that we do as human beings redundant, right? And this is sort of being kind of welcomed. You know, people talk about, oh, well, robots should do that. Yes, it means that people don't have to work. Well, what are you going to do with all these people that don't work? You know, people need to create something.
You know,
they need to make
my pet
something.
hate with the whole robot thing is when you're sort of like on a website and it's like, can you tick all the boxes? You know, being asked to tick all the boxes with traffic lights in them by a robot to prove you're not a robot. I'm being patronised by robots already, but I just want to do this story very quickly. I love this story. It's the front page of the Daily Star today. And eat your Christmas tree for a New Year boost, say experts. What's this one about?
Well, your Christmas tree apparently is supposed to be full of vitamin C, and you can take the pine needles off it and use it like rosemary, apparently, flavour your roast potatoes. You can eat the trunk. I have to say, you can, but doesn't mean to say you should, or doesn't mean to say you would want to.
They're always a bit sort of like dry and limp at this time of year, aren't they?
The thought of eating that thing that's been stuck in my living room for the past fortnight, gathering dust, I mean, really turns my stomach. But also, you know, on the one hand, this is a funny story. Like, why would anybody want to do this? It's just revolting, and this completely bonkers advice. What worries me a little bit, to be serious about it for the moment, is, you know, there's a lot of this kind of advice around that we should be eating cockroaches and worms and ants and bugs. And, well, what's wrong with proper food? You know, a nice bit of steak, some chips.
You're destroying the planet. Come on, how dare you destroy the planet?
Well, we're destroying pleasure, I think. You know, there's pleasure to be gained in steak and chips. There's no pleasure to be gained in a boiled up, mashed up Christmas tree.
Well, you can have chips with it, evidently. I mean, I must confess, I'm not tempting to eat mine on the grounds that it's plastic. I get it out of the loft every year. Greta Thunberg would hate me. Well, actually, I'm recycling it, so it's quite good, but I'm certainly not going to eat it.
No.
But we're going to leave it there. So if it's 12th night coming up, if you're a bit concerned about what to do with your tree, eat it. Right, that's the end of our first hour. We'll be right back with more after a very short break.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Most of us will see outbreaks of rain today. It will also be windy and it will be mild. The wind's coming from the southwest at the moment, bringing a lot of mild air with them, but also bringing an awful lot of cloud, outbreaks of rain, a couple of weather fronts to watch out for. One has already pushed through, bringing a spell of rain earlier, but the next weather front is moving in for the afternoon, and that will pep up the rain once again. So some gaps in between the spells of rain, especially in the east and for northern Scotland, where it stays fairly cold, but it is turning milder here, so the snow that we've seen eventually more confined to the higher tops of the mountains, and the rain replacing it. A lot of rain across the country, a strong wind, but that wind coming from the southwest, so it is going to be feeling mild, especially in the south. The rain, heavy at times as it moves through, could cause some issues for central and southern Scotland, particularly over higher parts, and it stays damp in the south as well through the evening and overnight. It's a windy night, but the winds, of course, since they're coming from the southwest, mean that it's going to be mild. Temperatures in many places in the double figures by dawn, just in the mid-single figures there for northern Scotland, where the rain eventually moves in overnight and then clears slowly through the morning. The rain also clearing the southern half of the UK, but in between there is a band of wetter weather for southern Scotland, for northern England and for Northern Ireland, that turning a bit more showery later in the day. And it's a mild day. Blustery, yes, but temperatures up at 14 Celsius in the south, 7 or 8 for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Some damp weather returning to Cornwall and Devon for a time during the afternoon and early evening, but that clears through. And then clear spells for many overnight on Wednesday night, showers in the north tending to fade away. Thursday looks like another showery day for many. Friday a little drier, but further rain or showers coming along for the weekend.
I'm Camilla Tominey. Join me on GB News on Sunday mornings for a politics show with personality on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Good morning and welcome to Bev Turner today on GB News with me, Dawn Neeson. Well spotted, I'm not Bev. Rail strikes are back in full force. Happy New Year, folks. A great way to start this year, isn't it? Disruption is set to take place between today and Saturday with very limited services, and you got great analysis in the first hour, so I'll be joined by my brilliant panel, author Joanna Williams and Peter Whittle from the New Culture Forum, and that's all coming up after a quick look at the news.
Good morning, it's 11 o'clock. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. Train passengers are being warned of significant disruption this week as over 40,000 rail workers stage fresh strikes. Members of the RMT union at Network Rail and 14 train operators will walk out for 48 hours from today and then again on Friday, whilst drivers in the ASLEF union will strike on Thursday. It's part of a long-running dispute over pay, jobs and conditions, which RMT General Secretary Mick Lynch told us it is vital for the future of the industry.
It's up to the government now to show us that they mean business and that they want to facilitate some talks, rather than undermining them, as we believe they did before Christmas, by putting provisions in that they know none of the railway unions can accept. So if we can get some realistic talks with some proper proposals and progressive talks, we'll work with all the parties to get that on.
Well, Transport Secretary Mark Harper says it's time for the unions to get off the picket line and round the negotiating table.
Government's going to continue to work really hard to try and help bring the two sides together to get this resolved. I know how frustrating this is for commuters, and the danger is it puts people off using the railways, which is a bit of self-harm on the part of the rail unions that haven't settled this dispute. What I think the government can do is make sure there's a fair and reasonable offer on the table, which there is, facilitate those negotiations between employers and trade unions, and try and make sure we get this dispute resolved for the travelling public.
Health bosses are calling on the government to respond to mounting pressure within the NHS, with top medics describing the current situation as unbearable. The Royal College of Emergency Medicine says somewhere between 300 to 500 people are dying each week as a result of delays in urgent care. The government says it's giving the NHS and social care sector an additional £14 billion over the next 2 years. Former Health Secretary Stephen Dorrell told GB News other parts of the primary care system need to be better utilised to ease pressure on the health service.
Also about the pressures in primary care and through GP services, through better use of other parts of the primary care system, notably pharmacies, so that people can have ready access to the right level of support. It's unhelpful, I think, when people say or imply that the only way you can get healthcare support is by seeing a GP. That's nonsense.
Meanwhile, NHS data shows the number of children needing help for serious mental health problems rose by 39% last year. The NHS says it received more than 1 million referrals in England for those under the age of 18. They involve children who are suicidal, self-harming and suffering serious depression or anxiety. The Royal College of Psychiatry says increasing social inequality, austerity and online harm have played a role. Low-income households will receive £900 cash support this spring to help with the cost of living crisis. The government says the money will go directly to bank accounts in 3 separate payments. But campaigners argue support for the most vulnerable has not increased on what was announced last year, despite rising costs. 8 million people will be eligible, including those on universal credit, pension credit and tax credits. 2 British citizens are among 4 people killed in a mid-air crash between 2 helicopters in Australia yesterday. Diane and Ron Hughes, aged 57 and 65, were on holiday in the country when the accident happened in Australia's Gold Coast region. 3 others were left critically injured. Queensland police say the initial investigations indicate the collision occurred when one helicopter was taking off and the other was landing. An NFL player is in a critical condition after suffering a cardiac arrest during a match in Cincinnati. The Buffalo Bills club has confirmed Damar Hamlin collapsed on the field after a tackle in the first quarter against the Cincinnati Bengals. The 24-year-old is currently sedated in hospital but remains in a critical condition. The game was postponed following the incident. Brazilian footballing legend Pelé is due to be buried today. Thousands of fans have gathered to pay respects and file past the coffin at the grounds of his former club, Santos. Pelé lost his battle with cancer last Thursday. The three-time World Cup winner was 82. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Dawn.
Good morning, I'm Dawn Neeson. I'm standing in for Bev Turner today on GB News. Now, 40,000 members of the RMT union are on their first two-day walkout of the week today as commuters return to the office after the festive break, sparking fears people will just give up on train travel for good. Our reporters have the latest from Yorkshire and Birmingham. Oh, sorry, I was transfixed by a picture of Harry popping up on my screen there. Right, the Duke of Sussex will face American broadcaster Anderson Cooper for an interview on 60 Minutes on Sunday. The trailer released on social media, here's the Duke of Sussex, has said he wants his father and brother back. We'll be joined by our royal reporter and a former royal butler, interesting one, and I'll be joined once again by my brilliant panel, author Joanna Williams and director of the New Culture Forum, Peter Whittle. We'll be getting stuck into all the biggest stories of the day in today's papers, and some of them are quite fun as well. And of course, this show is nothing without you and your views. Email me on gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews to have your say. Train passengers face fresh travel disruption from today as tens of thousands of rail workers walk out in a continued dispute over pay, jobs and conditions. Members of the RMT union will stage a 48-hour walkout and about half of the network will shut down with 20% of normal services running. So joining us now to discuss this are our reporters Jack Carson, who's at a Birmingham New Street station, and Anna Riley is at Leeds station. Hello, good morning to you both, looking suitably wrapped up against the grim weather there. Jack, let's start with you. What's it like where you are at the moment? What are you hearing from people who are trying to use trains today?
Well, I've finally managed to find a picket line. There was meant to be 4 here at Birmingham New Street, but there only seems to be one just over my shoulder that you can see that seems to have actually properly turned up. There's meant to be one at Network Rail. There wasn't anybody as attendance. There's a couple of RMT flags around the corner, but nobody standing by them. So there's only real one picket line here today. They're members of the cross-country train operating company, and they've been telling me that they're ready to continue striking. For people and commuters here, it's adding time onto their journey. One person I spoke to, it's added 40 minutes onto their journey. They tried to get the tram into the city centre. It was packed. They said there was police on board to try and make sure that there was no disruption or further injury to anyone caused, because the other public transport systems here have been a lot busier. But in terms of the people on the picket line behind me, they're not really sure when this is going to end. They haven't had an offer that they feel has been acceptable to them. We know in terms of the other companies that the RMT are in dispute with, the Network Rail in particular. They of course rejected that pay rise. It was a 5% backdated pay rise in 2022, a 4% pay rise in 2023. Their members, 55% of their members voted to reject that offer, and so the disruption and that negotiation continues. Mick Lynch saying that they're ready to keep coming to the table if the government invites them. They said they haven't really received anything over the past couple of weeks, but they're willing to negotiate and find a settlement and a resolution solution to this. But of course, one of the things the government slipped into the deal Mick Lynch was saying over Christmas was, of course, things about driver-only trains and removing guards from trains, things like removing ticket offices from stations around the country, and they're things that Mick Lynch said is not acceptable, he's not going to accept. And so until the government and the RMT come back to the table again to try and negotiate these issues and these things out and make that settlement, then disruption here in Birmingham and across the country is going to continue.
And Jack, from the community you've spoken to this morning, what is the mood? Are they still quite supportive of the strike, or have they had enough now? They just want to get on with their lives?
Birmingham's always been a bit of I can understand both sides really. You've of course people are disrupted. This is a busy city. It's one of the youngest cities in the UK. Lots of people coming for business. There's a lot more businesses, big businesses coming and moving to Birmingham. So it's the first day as well after New Year's and Christmas that millions of people are going back to work for the first time. So it has disrupted them and it has added time onto their journey. But they're also saying to me that look, we get it. And actually they're quite supportive of the RMT and saying the government and train operating companies should give them what they want, so the disruption can stop.
Right, great, thank you. Right, let's go to Anna. You're in Leeds now, looking suitably cuddled up there. It's a little bit wet and miserable. Is that a picket line behind you? I can see there, Anna.
Good morning. Yes, I'm here at the RMT picket line just outside Leeds train station, where people have been out here since early this morning. And it's much the same as what Jack was describing happening here in Leeds. People on this picket line are very resolute. They've got that mandate in place as the RMT for another 5 months potentially of strikes until they get the deal that they want. And people here on the picket line are telling me it's not just about money. Of course, that comes into it with the cost of living. They feel that the price increase that they've been given would amount to an actual pay decrease, so that's why they've refused that. But they're concerned as well about these driver-only trains. They feel like that's going to be unsafe, not having guards on board, and also the removal of ticket offices and these potential redundancies that are coming. So it's much more about terms and conditions from people that I've been speaking to here today. And in terms of passengers, it's a bit of a mixed bag, really. There are still people that do support these strikes. While we've been on the picket line here, there's been members of the public coming and bringing chocolates to the striking workers in support of them. But also speaking to people at the train station, there is still some frustration. It's the first day back at work for many people after the Christmas and New Year's Eve break, and they're finding it hard to get in. If you can't work from home, if you don't drive, and you have to rely on trains, it is very difficult when these strikes are happening to get about their daily business. So there is some frustration, but there is still some support in place as well.
And are you seeing an effect on the centre of Leeds where you are? I mean, with less people coming through the station, the businesses actually based at the station and the small cafes around it, they must be effective.
You haven't spoken to us or had any interviews with the RMT?
Anna?
Of course, yes, it does have a knock-on impact to these surrounding businesses, and it has a knock-on impact for congestion in the city centre as well. That's something I've seen right next to me. There's roadworks going on, and with more people trying to use buses or cars, it's adding to congestion in the city centre as well.
And Jack, bringing you back in briefly, have you seen the same in Birmingham? Again, a very, very busy station, lots of small businesses there. Oh, Jack, I think we've lost you. Right, OK, sorry, I think we appear to have lost you. Your mic's obviously gone on strike. Thank you so much, Anna and Jack. They're reporting from the front line and what the chaos it's having. Not just on our people trying to travel, but obviously on small businesses around the area as well. Right, so this show is nothing without you. So let's have a look at some of the emails that you have sent in. Right, OK, I'm going to absolutely read them out if I can find where I put them down, which are here somewhere. OK. Yes, where are they? OK. OK, right, OK, I'll read them out after the break. On the grounds that I've got so much paperwork on my desk, I can't find them. Right, but after the break, I'll be joined by my wonderful panel, author Joanna Williams and director of the New Culture Forum, Peter Whittle. And we'll get stuck into the biggest stories of the day and see you in a sec. I'm going to look for my paperwork.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Most of us will see outbreaks of rain today. It will also be windy and it will be mild. The wind's coming from the southwest at the moment, bringing a lot of mild air with them, but also bringing an awful lot of cloud, outbreaks of rain, a couple of weather fronts to watch out for. One has already pushed through, bringing a spell of rain earlier, but the next weather front is moving in for the afternoon, and that will pep up the rain once again. So some gaps in between the spells of rain, especially in the east and for northern Scotland, where it stays fairly cold, but it is turning milder here. So there are snow that we've seen eventually more confined to the higher tops of the mountains, and the rain replacing it. A lot of rain across the country, a strong wind, but that wind coming from the southwest, so it is going to be feeling mild, especially in the south. The rain, heavy at times as it moves through, could cause some issues for central and southern Scotland, particularly over higher parts, and it stays damp in the south as well through the evening and overnight. It's a windy night, but the winds, of course, since they're coming from the southwest, mean that it's going to be mild. Temperatures in many places in the double figures by dawn, just in the mid-single figures there for northern Scotland, where the rain eventually moves in overnight and then clears slowly through the morning. The rain also clearing the southern half of the UK, but in between there is a band of wetter weather for southern Scotland, for northern England and for Northern Ireland, that turning a bit more showery later in the day. And it's a mild day. Blustery, yes, but temperatures up at 14 Celsius in the south, 7 or 8 for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Some damp weather returning to Cornwall and Devon for a time during the afternoon and early evening, but that clears through. And then clear spells for many overnight on Wednesday night, showers in the north tending to fade away. Thursday looks like another showery day for many. Friday a little drier, but further rain or showers coming along for the weekend.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
It's 11:20. This is Bev Turner today on GB News with me, Dawn Neeson. Right now, let's have a look at some of the emails that you've sent in. I did find them, by the way. All the paper on this desk, guess which got blown on the floor by the fan in the corner? Your emails. Anyway, keep sending them in. I've got them now, definitely. Right, so I'm going to read them out loud for you now. Some great ones coming in, by the way. It's all, obviously, Harry and Meghan and the strikes. Right, OK, Harry and Meghan need to see a doctor first before begging to have his father and brother back. Harry was always the idiot prince. He was pathetic, says Jackie. The first one was from Aidan, by the way. Yeah, it's quite strong opinions here. And going on to the NHS, how many of the 7 hospitals that have declared critical instance have a high population of illegal migrants? Oh, my gosh, again, that is an area that we haven't actually discussed, have we, the increase in population from migrants coming into the country? Right, and the NHS, that was from Len, and Carol says, the NHS are given more of my taxes year on year. Half of taxes now goes to the NHS. How much more do they want? And it is true that we are spending billions on the NHS, which is why I'm quite keen to see whether it is fit for purpose anymore, whether more money will actually save it. Meanwhile, William says, if Harry is in pain, as Dr. Tessa Dunlop contends, then it is entirely self-inflicted and cushioned by the multi-millions he has earned by briefing against his family. He and his wife are not exactly suffering the cost of living crisis, are they? They are pathetic. Not exactly favourable towards the Montecito prince and princess. Meanwhile, Sue on the NHS says, I am a retired nurse of 51 years. The NHS is not in crisis. It is not on a knife edge. What we dreaded to happen, the NHS has fallen over. And I think that is a point that is coming through time and time again on what we're hearing from you and sort of like and what people are saying out there as well. I mean, Peter, it's like, you know, is the NHS, do we have to admit now that after all these years it is fit for purpose, or do we just need to reorganise it?
Well, I think, I mean, the main point to say about this, I think, actually, Ron, is that it's become an article of faith in this country that, you know, you can't criticise the NHS, and any criticism of the NHS is immediately met with allegations that you want to privatise it, that
yes.
you want to destroy it. Indeed, we saw that with your interview with the gentleman this morning. Was saying there was an agenda to destroy it. If there is an agenda to destroy it, they've got a very funny way of showing it, actually, because, I mean, the whole modus operandi behind the pandemic was to save, actually, the NHS.
It was, actually.
If anything,
good point.
It was actually so that its faults did not become clear, actually. It was actually to stop that happening. Unfortunately, possibly one could say that the pandemic has actually exposed quite how dysfunctional it is. It's not the envy of the world anymore, but the point is, I sort of like was born and raised on the NHS. I believe in the NHS. I believe in social healthcare. It's just there might be very important structural things wrong with the way that it's organised at the moment. Someone is going to have the guts, actually, to wrestle with that, some politician. I actually can't see it happening. I cannot see it happening, actually.
John, I think that's a very good point Peter's made, that people are terrified to even criticise it now because you are accused of privatising it. But when we think it's the 5th largest employer in the entire world, and we're only actually a small country compared to the rest of the world, and, you know, you have got sort of like 500 pen pushers, is the phrase we have to use, obviously, on over £100,000 a year. So surely the structure does need to be looked at.
Well, I agree completely. And the problem we've got is that the NHS is set up exactly as Peter says, as this kind of institution that we cannot criticise, absolutely beyond reproach. But at the same time, it's also used as a political football to beat us with. So I think every single year of my adult life, life, you get to October, November, December, and we get these headlines, and suddenly every time there's a general election in the offing, 10 days to save the NHS in crisis, crunch time for the NHS. Every year we get this story. It's a bit like the boy who cries wolf there, because now it seems to me that the NHS is not on a knife edge or not at crisis point. It's fallen over. It has collapsed. If it's true, and we can only assume it is, these stories of people having to wait days for ambulances, days to be admitted onto a ward, people dying in the hundreds because they're not getting the treatment. Well, this isn't an NHS, a service, a National Health Service. This is an institution that has failed. I think Rishi Sunak should be out there before the nation declaring a national emergency, sacking these managers who failed to do the job that they are paid thousands of pounds a year to do, hundreds of thousands of pounds a year to do. And they should be actually taking control of this situation. The most fundamental level, if you have an accident, suffer a heart attack or a stroke, you need to see a doctor, you need to be admitted to a hospital. And a country that cannot provide that most basic level of service for the population is a country that has failed, is failing the population. And we kind of are mincing around it, on a knife edge. It's not. It's failed. We need to be honest, and we need to solve this now.
I think the shocking statistic that came out this week is that, there are 300 to 500 avoidable deaths a week because of failings in emergency care.
That's right. But also, you see, on top of that as well, we've got this sort of, well, it has been a tsunami, actually, of deaths that have come from the approach that was taken by the NHS during the pandemic. I know I've already said this, but it's incredibly important. It became the National COVID Service. It didn't happen in other European health services. It didn't happen at all. We all know what's happened, therefore, in terms of cancer treatments, in terms of heart conditions and all of that. Those sort of decisions were wrong. Simple as that. But the fact is, if you had said that at the time, you were a granny killer.
Yes.
Right? It's as simple as that. I think the problem is this, and I think Joanna has actually really said this, is that it was built on 1948 principles, right? The population was much, much smaller then than it is now, but also what people expected from it was different. It was looked upon as a kind of something to value. And I remember my parents would do anything other than go. They didn't want to put pressure on doctors. They say, oh, it'll go in a few days. Apparently now people actually just want to turn up at the drop of a hat, even just to get pills or whatever for something quite small. What it's meant to provide has increased and increased, to an extraordinary amount. And that was just simply not for...
Yeah. It brings it actually very neatly onto a story that you've picked out, Joanna, which is about, on the Telegraph front page, about flu advice and face masks.
Yeah.
Obviously, the constant COVID advice, face masks, don't go out, you'll kill granny, etc. And now we've been told again it's back to face masks because of the flu.
Yeah, another story, I'm afraid, which makes me very angry. The evidence around face masks was never conclusive. We need to be absolutely clear about that. Particularly the kind of homemade piece of cloth face masks that people were wearing and kind of chucking in the bottom of a pocket or a handbag and pulling out half dirty. There was never strong evidence to suggest that they did much or anything at all to prevent COVID. I mean, if they had done, we wouldn't have needed vaccines and social distancing. It makes no sense. And yet this has now been set in place, that this is our personal responsibility, something we should do, and it's being trotted out all over again. It makes me cross. Nobody ever talks about the downside of face masks, how they prevent communication, how we've got children suffering mental health problems, very, very young children suffering speech and language deficits. And we've got to ask how much have face masks actually played a role in promoting some of those difficulties. And yet it becomes very easy just to churn out this same advice all over again.
And it's quite chilling, because I think a lot of people were mental health issues because of the whole, don't go out, you'll kill granny, wear a face mask, etc., etc. And now we almost feel like we're being edged to go back to that.
Yeah.
And the advice that's coming out, I think some in the papers again today, it's like, advice to parents, right? Okay, if your child is ill, don't send it to school. Now, do parents need to be told that?
Well, no, they don't. But you know what worries me most of all, and this is where I've got to say I disagree slightly with Peter, the advice that's also coming out is stay away from hospitals, stay away, save the NHS by not using the NHS. And I guess where I disagree slightly is, I think maybe 5-10 years ago it was the case that people would rush to A&E, you know, because they'd cut their fingernail or you know, something very trivial. I actually think the pandemic changed all of that, and I think we did learn not to use hospitals. We sometimes, tragically, when we were in dire need of using hospitals, people have given up. I've certainly given up on getting a GP appointment, on Google instead.
I was going to say, this is another thing that people have mentioned in all the views coming in today is like, well, we are going to A&E a lot more because we can't get to see a GP still.
Yes, but that doesn't mean to say that there's not real problems.
No,
people have got real serious health problems, and yet again we're being told, don't bother turning up at a hospital.
I mean, we have the ridiculous situation, Peter, where GPs still shut for lunch.
Yes, and also there's this growing trend for remote doctoring. In fact, it was on this very programme a few weeks ago. We were talking about it, whereby I think it's in Cornwall, they're piloting a scheme whereby you do your own blood tests in midlife. Just to check up that everything's fine. I mean, the possibilities of something like that going wrong, or even, getting off the ground in the first place, are, I would have thought.
And Peter, the interesting thing with that, it might be okay. You talk about midlife. I'm not entirely sure what midlife is.
Well, sort of, 50s.
Yeah, I'm going to be 100 odd then. Great, excellent. But if you're asking sort of like people who are in their 80s to do these things at home, my mum was asked to send various samples off via the post. She was absolutely horrified.
No, absolutely. And it's not just for older people as well, but even for younger people. You phone up the doctor in the morning and then you're told, well, you can't see a doctor. The doctor will phone you back to kind of triage you before you even get to see the doctor. We can't give you a time. So what you're supposed to do, take the day off work, just sit around all day, or you go out, you take your mobile with you, you're in the middle of the supermarket, and you're trying to discuss your intimate health problems whilst you're in the aisle picking your cornflakes off the shelf. It's not appropriate, and so people avoid using it and don't, and then it builds up these problems further down the line.
And there are also just a few things, in a way, you don't even need a massive overhaul of the structure. There are small things that happen in European health services, which again are absolutely verboten here. For example, a small fee when you go and see
like in Germany and Australia, they both
a small fee. Obviously, huge numbers of people would be exempt from paying that. But I imagine that the amount of money that would bring in is enormous. And also, for example, here, the amount of missed appointments that there were before were just allowed to go.
Yes.
You also mentioned, there, Dawn, I think it's very important, is the huge increase in our population over the past 10 years. This is one of those things that nobody addresses, really, but that must happen.
Again, it's one of those things we can't talk about because it makes you racist. Right, OK, we have to move on. And after the break, Prince Harry says he wants his brother back. Funny way of going about it. But has he gone too far? Has the damage been done? Or can he salvage that relationship? Don't go away. That's coming up after your morning news.
Dawn, thank you. It's 11:32. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. Train passengers are being warned of significant disruption this week as over 40,000 rail workers stage fresh strikes. Members of the RMT union at Network Rail and 14 train operators will walk out for 48 hours from today and again on Friday, whilst drivers in the ASLEF union will strike on Thursday. This latest action is part of the long-running dispute over pay, jobs and conditions, which RMT General Secretary Mick Lynch told us is vital for the future of the industry.
Up to the government now to show us that they mean business and that they want to facilitate some talks, rather than undermining them as we believe they did before Christmas by putting provisions in that they know none of the railway unions can accept. So if we can get some realistic talks with some proper proposals and progressive talks, we'll work with all the parties to get that on.
Transport Secretary Mark Harper says it's time for the unions to get off the picket line and round the negotiating table.
Government's going to continue to work really hard to try and help bring the two sides together to get this resolved. I know how frustrating this is for commuters, and the danger is it puts people off using the railways, which is a bit of self-harm on the part of the rail unions that haven't settled this dispute. What I think the government can do is make sure there's a fair and reasonable offer on the table, which there is, facilitate those negotiations between employers and trade unions, and try and make sure we get this dispute resolved for the travelling public.
Health bosses are warning the government needs to respond to mounting pressure within the NHS, with top medics describing the current situation as unbearable. More than a dozen NHS trusts and ambulance services declared critical incidents over the festive period. The Royal College of Emergency Medicine says somewhere between 300 to 500 people are dying each week as a result of delays in urgent care. The government says it's given the NHS and social care sector an additional £14 billion over the next 2 years. 2 British citizens were among 4 people killed in a mid-air crash between 2 helicopters in Australia yesterday. Diane and Ron Hughes, aged 57 and 65, were on holiday in the country when the accident happened in Australia's Gold Coast region. 3 others were left critically injured. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
There's a guy who went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Hi, it's 11:37. She says, checking her phone. This is Bev Turner today on GB News with me, Dawn Neeson, holding on to her paperwork desperately. Right, the Duke of Sussex will face American broadcaster Anderson Cooper for an interview on 60 Minutes on Sunday, showing Cooper walking with Prince Harry and teases revelations about the contents of that book. Back in the UK, Harry is also due to be interviewed by ITV's Tom Bradbury, also his mate. He's known him since a teenager, actually. So it's like double whammy of Harry coming up. Right, now our royal reporter, Cameron Walker, joins us live now. Cameron, I feel like we are having this conversation time and time again, but what can we expect from what Harry is up to now?
Indeed, it's pretty much the same arguments or allegations he was making just last month during the Netflix documentary series that Buckingham Palace allegedly colluded with the media, briefing and counter-briefing to make him and Meghan look like the victims, look like the villains in order to make William and Catherine perhaps look better. That's the allegation. Buckingham Palace have not responded, as they haven't haven't responded to any of these claims. There's pros and cons to that, I suppose. I mean, on the plus side, it doesn't drag them into this Hollywood-style tit-for-tat argument. It perhaps doesn't cheapen the monarchy either. But the problem is, Dawn, we're only getting one side of the story with this, and it's Prince Harry's truth. Perhaps not the whole truth.
Yeah, and this is the interesting thing, because Harry knows that his brother and father will never answer back. Because, I mean, as he says, I think, in one of the interviews, he says, you know, the motto is never complain, never explain. But it is just a motto. They do brief behind the scenes. And it's like, you know, they collude with the press. And it's like, so it's Harry and Meghan who collude with the press all the time as well.
Well, exactly, yeah. I think that's half the problem. I think the fact that there are two separate interviews for this to kind of publicise his new book, Spare, which is coming out next week. We've got CBS with Anderson Cooper, where he was accused of leaking and planting stories against Buckingham Palace. But then ITV's was very much about he wants to reconcile with his brother, reconcile with the king. He wants his father back. He wants his brother back. So the two can't really go hand in hand, because on the one hand he wants to make peace with his family, but then he's equally perhaps trashing them in this CBS interview.
Surely, I mean, he's not the sharpest tool in the box, I think, you know, as most people would admit. But surely he must see that if you want to build bridges with your family, this is not the way to go about it.
I think perhaps Prince Harry might have been backed into a bit of a corner here, because he is no longer a working member of the royal family. He has to make money somehow. And I'm afraid, due to the publicity of this book and the way he's decided to make money, is capitalising on the fact he is a member of the royal family and talking about his private experiences growing up within the firm, and equally his experience having married Meghan as a member of the working firm, and his problems with that. And he's airing his dirty laundry in public, as it were. And he perhaps has discovered that actually gives him money.
Money, it's all about money. How much of this do you think, Cameron, is being encouraged by Meghan?
It's an interesting question. I think Prince Harry clearly has a lot of trauma. He's spoken about it himself in the past, following the death of his mother, Diana, Princess of Wales, that effect that had on him. And since then, he has really had a problem with the press. I don't agree with the narrative that it was Meghan that pushed him out of the royal family and encouraged him to leave the royal family. I think Prince Harry very much wanted to find a way out before he even met Meghan. But I think it is right to say that Meghan was perhaps a catalyst in them actually leaving as working members of the royal family. Clearly, there's a Hollywood influence and an American influence here. Meghan will be very aware of how the American media landscape works compared to here in the United Kingdom. And I think Prince Harry is happy to go along with that.
Finally, it's a four-book deal with Random House that Harry and Meghan signed. That's £17 million for Spare alone. Now, Meghan's already had the children's book, The Bench, out.
Yeah.
They're also supposedly writing a book on wellness. I'm not sure what that's going to be. But the other rumour, I don't know if you know any more than I do about this one, is that Meghan is also going to write an autobiography telling more of her truth about her, 72 days with the royal family.
Yes, I've equally heard this rumour as well, that Meghan is also going to be writing a memoir. She perhaps alluded to that in an interview she did, I think it was with one of the US magazines last year, where she hinted that she hasn't signed or wasn't told to sign a non-disclosure agreement when she left as a working member of the royal family, which means technically she is free to say whatever she likes. So we'll have to wait and see on that one. But it would surprise me if she didn't actually write a book, to be honest, because there's been so many interviews with Harry and Meghan that it would seem almost impossible, but she wouldn't want to tell her side of the story.
Oh, my gosh. We await with bated breath, don't we? Thank you so much, Cameron. Right, OK, listening to what Cameron had to say there was the former royal butler, Grant Harold. And Grant is joining us now. Hello, there you are, Grant. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. What do you make of this situation today on the front of all the front pages of the newspapers? Harry, I want my father and brother back. What do you make of what the interviews he's given and the fact that the book's coming out next week?
It's a really interesting one, Dom, because I shared on social media last night before I left the UK, and the debate that's going on is extraordinary, and it's hundreds of thousands of people with their views and their comments. And I the situation's horrible. I feel a little bit for Harry. Bear in mind, I knew him, but also saying he wants his father and brother back, I understand what he's trying to say. I get where he's coming from. I don't think they're going the right way about doing that. And I also agree with what Cameron said a second ago. I don't think Meghan pushed him out the royal family. Harry's the Harry that I knew was a very strong-willed character. You know, he did things that he wanted to do. Obviously, there's been reports that he was looking for a way out. I was never aware of that when I was there, but of course, as he became a working member of the royal family, maybe it wasn't what he wanted to do, but I think it would be his choice. But obviously, he would consult his wife and family on that. But the whole thing, as I've always said, Don, is really sad. And I've always talked about the end game. I wonder what the end game is. And I think for him, obviously, he's telling us that he would like his father and brother back. They were very close. I believe that. But as I said, I don't think they're going the right way about doing this.
What, I mean, you do, you know, as you say, you were a royal butler, you know the boys. I mean, what effect do you think this is having on William, who won't say anything? We know he won't, because that's what the family do. They don't ever explain.
Well, the Queen famously always said, as you've mentioned, don't complain, don't explain, which it's put them in quite a good place for many, many years, or even centuries. I think that's obviously the way they do things. But I think personally, I think it's really difficult because I was aware of how close they were. They were very close, like any other family. I think that's what people maybe find extraordinary or hard to believe. They are like any other family. They are close. They have the highs and lows. The sad part is being one of the most famous families in the world, when you do have a fallout, it's unlike, Don, if we have family fallouts, especially over Christmas and things, you don't read about it the next day, where with the royal family, we are reading about it because obviously they're talking about it. And I can understand them talking about it, that they want to get out there, what's happened to them. I do understand that. But as I said, I think there's ways of doing it. And unfortunately, it's a really tricky one. And as I've always said, I'm kind of on the fence. I feel sorry for everybody involved because I know how close they all were.
Grant, just one quick question. Do you think the boys will ever reunite and get back to the closeness they once shared as brother?
Don, I'm a huge believer in time as a healer, and I'm hoping that when things calm down, that one day we will see them become best friends again. But as I said, time is a healer, but who knows?
For joining us this morning, and we can but hope, because I do think it's sad when any families fall out. I'm sorry, I can't help but doing that. Right, we move on now. Medics are warning that the NHS is on a knife edge as critical incidents are declared in hospital trusts across the country. Earlier, I spoke to Dr. Bob Gill, GP and director of the Great NHS Heist, who says money is being sucked out of the NHS, impacting the delivery of care. Let's have a listen to what he had to say.
In October of this year alone, there were over 40,000 people waiting for a hospital bed 12 hours after a decision to admit them had been made. Now, those are record figures. We know that for every 80 patients waiting under those circumstances, there will be one preventable death. So we are in new territory, and people like myself, campaigners, have been warning for years now that the NHS is being deliberately defunded, restructured, and the chaos we face now is of deliberate government creation. Let's not be in any illusions about what's going on here. We have the deliberate sabotaging, bringing the NHS to a point of collapse so the politicians can break our trust in the service, so they can move us to an insurance-based system. The junior doctors voting for strike action in the next few days. We have nurses voting for strike action. We have ambulance men on strike. Now, you would have thought this would be an obvious thing to sort out to stem the hemorrhage of staff out of the NHS. So that's the first thing they could do. The next thing they could do is to allow healthcare workers who have been pushed out of the health and social care system because of their non-compliance with a COVID mandate to bring them back into the workforce. So we have a problem of discharging patients out of NHS hospitals into social care, so they could very instantly repair some of the damage that their policies have already done. Respect the restoration of wages that NHS staff are requiring to stem the exodus of NHS staff.
Is a lot of people who watch and listen to GB News would say that the system is broken, it's not fit for purpose anymore. Do you think the NHS does need a radical overhaul, not just more money slung at it?
Well, it has had multiple radical overhauls that have got us to this situation. We have had consecutive governments deliberately restructuring the NHS, pretending as if nothing has changed. But what has undergone behind the scenes is a massive structural change, which has fragmented the NHS, outsourced services, saddled it with massive debts, private finance initiative debts, and allowed the sucking away of money away from the delivery of care.
Wow, OK, right. It's not good news this morning, is it? I'm sorry, I'm trying to do a Happy New Year thing for you. Right, my panellists are still with me. They haven't gone on strike. Joanna Williams and Peter Whittle. Right, Peter, we are going to change the subject now.
Yeah.
Still not a very happy story, it has to be said. You've picked a story that's in the Telegraph about food banks. What's going on with this?
That's right. Basically, it's a little bit of a kerfuffle that's happened because...
I do like that word.
Yes, because a Conservative MP... one, they say, from the Red Wall, Brendan Clark-Smith, has said that firemen who are allegedly having to use food banks just simply need how to budget, and that essentially if you're on 32,000 salary, you shouldn't be using food banks. And so, of course, because it's a backbench Tory MP, of course, he's got a fair amount of criticism for this.
Do you think he's got a point, though, Peter?
I think he has. I'm sorry. I mean, yeah, you shouldn't have to use a food bank on 32,000.
Joanna?
Well, I think the problem is 32,000, it can vary hugely depending upon your circumstances. If you're a single person in a part of the country where house prices are cheap, then absolutely you should be able to live off 32,000. But if you're living in London or part of the southeast where house prices are extremely high, you have 2 or 3 children, 32,000 is going to go very, very quickly. But that doesn't mean to say that I don't think there is something in this story about food banks, and I think we should be questioning what really is going on here. So at risk of kind of giving a sob story, I grew up in Middlesbrough in the 1970s, 1980s. There was incredibly high unemployment. Both of my parents were out of work. I was one of 5 children. There were no food banks. People did manage to get by. So I think there is a very interesting phenomenon going on here with food banks, where it's become almost too easy as a kind of last resort. And I think the problem with that is it stops us taking a bigger look at what are the real economic problems, either at personal level or at the level of the whole country, that we've got this situation, or has it become a kind of self-perpetuating thing that because food banks are there, it becomes an option for people to make use of?
Again, it's one of those things, like so many things these days, like we were discussing earlier on with the NHS, that people are frightened to criticise it or to point out that maybe things that do need saying, because then you're accused of being all sorts of trying to destroy the NHS, or sort of like, you're so privileged, you're middle-class London existence now that what do you know about food banks? It's an ongoing, but until we have these debates, which is what we do so well on GB News, we have these debates so you can talk about these issues, and no one's going to get cancelled or shouted down, because we need to talk about these things, but we're so frightened these days of doing so.
I think, yes, anything to do with poverty or perceived poverty is a bit of, a landmine area, actually, because, as well, what we consider to be poverty, and that is conditions that might give rise to going to a food bank, that has changed, become much more relative. In fact, it was changed, I think, officially around about 1960. The idea of poverty being simply not being able to feed yourself. And that was sort of official, and it was changed. Now I think it's about a lack of choice, I think. This has actually come to Joanna, you might know this more better than I, but it's essentially about not having the freedom of choice that you should have. Which is not the same as not being able to feed yourself. But I can, absolutely, you look at the cost of living now, I totally get it, outside of London, and you sort of think, how do people even manage on 16, 17, 18,000. But we're talking here about 32,000 sales.
No. I think there are important issues to discuss around personal responsibility as well, and which is absolutely not to say that people shouldn't have higher wages, but it's kind of people collecting.
I think that's an important point, isn't it? We
is.
are now always looking for somebody else to blame. The days of personal responsibility appear to be long gone, no matter what the problem is. But we are going to move on to another story now, because people are using food banks will probably not be affording what you're going to talk about.
I mean, I think I've got to preface this by saying take out the world's smallest violin, because it's ski holidays which are threatened with being ruined this year because there are, well, it's probably all to do with climate change, isn't it? Obvious stories always are. There's snow in the lower stretches of the Alps. I've got to confess, it means absolutely nothing to me. I've never been skiing. I've never been on a ski holiday. So my heart bleeds for these poor rich people who are wanting to go off skiing and finding that they are having to go up to a higher level, presumably up the mountain, to find the snow.
It's very much a time story.
Exactly.
It's very much aimed at their market, it has to be said. But, I mean, obviously, it's like, you know, we will all be looking forward to a nice holiday this year at some point. Hopefully we can get away. Any plans?
I have to say none as yet, but I would like to think about making some.
Staycations, evidently.
Yeah, well, no, I really do want to go away, you know, as soon as possible, probably about Easter, possibly, but also my whole attitude to travelling has changed. I don't know about you, but I find the actual travelling part of it now a really deeply unpleasant experience.
Oh, yes.
And I cannot face it often. That would almost be enough for me not...
And if that mask thing comes back...
Well, almost like it would stop me going.
No, stop with the mask. Right, well, that's it. We've come to the end of our show. So a massive thank you to Joanna and Peter, and for all of you for watching. Coming up next is GB News Live with Stephen Dixon. Bev Turner will be back tomorrow. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Most of us will see outbreaks of rain today. It will also be windy and it will be mild. The wind's coming from the southwest at the moment, bringing a lot of mild air with them, but also bringing an awful lot of cloud, outbreaks of rain, a couple of weather fronts to watch out for. One has already pushed through, bringing a spell of rain earlier, but the next weather front is moving in for the afternoon, and that will pep up the rain once again. So some gaps in between the spells of rain, especially in the east and for northern Scotland, where it stays fairly cold, but it is turning milder here. So there are snow that we've seen eventually more confined to the higher tops of the mountains, and the rain replacing it. A lot of rain across the country, a strong wind, but that wind coming from the southwest, so it is going to be feeling mild, especially in the south. The rain, heavy at times as it moves through, could cause some issues for central and southern Scotland, particularly over higher parts, and it stays damp in the south as well through the evening and overnight. It's a windy night, but the winds, of course, since they're coming from the southwest, mean that it's going to be mild. Temperatures in many places in the double figures by dawn, just in the mid-single figures there for northern Scotland, where the rain eventually moves in overnight and then clears slowly through the morning. The rain also clearing the southern half of the UK, but in between there is a band of wetter weather for southern Scotland, for northern England and for Northern Ireland, that turning a bit more showery later in the day. And it's a mild day. Blustery, yes, but temperatures up at 14 Celsius in the south, 7 or 8 for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Some damp weather returning to Cornwall and Devon for a time during the afternoon and early evening, but that clears through. And then clear spells for many overnight on Wednesday night, showers in the north tending to fade away. Thursday looks like another showery day for many. Friday a little drier, but further rain or showers coming along for the weekend.
I'm Camilla Tominey. Join me on GB News on Sunday mornings for a politics show with personality on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
We are GB News right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing. You see, amazing.
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom.